Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is all about Black Yellow Big Mom with Georia. This is of course a theory deck using the new OP06 cards that will come out next month. We have reached a point in One Piece TCG where there is just a diverse pool of cards for every color to build a deck. Now, when it comes to black and yellow, these two colors have such strong cards that the biggest challenge is simply the 50 card deck limit that you have to work with. And that is the challenge I had in making this deck. Now, I chose to optimize strong on curve plays packaged together with the Big Mom archetype. And let me be transparent here for a second, because when deciding to make this deck, I chose between the Big Mom archetype. I was choosing between the Big Mom archetype and the Sky Island archetype. I think both have some of the strongest curves in yellow. Primarily, the two-turn curve or the second turn curve for Sky Island is very strong. When we think about like Shura going into Ohm and summoning Holly or Holy, the Big Mom archetype has a very strong like first turn curve, and that's when we think about like putting into Perospero into like, and then going into your 7 cost Big Mom a turn after. So ultimately, like I said, I decided to go with the Big Mom package because I didn't want to run the risk of sending our Big Moms to the bottom of the deck with Shura and Ohm. Plus, between the black and yellow pool of cards, you can actually find strong standalone 2 cost cards and 4 cost cards to include in your deck that don't require any specific archetype and that work really well with Geomoria's ability. With that being said, let's take a look at what this deck could look like. Okay, so here is the list that I am running. Honestly, yellow has a lot of good cards that it's so hard to fit everything. So you will notice Amaro isn't on here, even though it's a great card. I just did not have room to include it. I do have 11 2K counters. Perhaps that's a little too much for some people, and you can change the list, to however to fit your own playstyle. So if you want to add other cards by taking some of the 2K counter cards out, be my guest. I also have the 2 cost Big Mom blocker. Her name's Galette. I think that's how you pronounce it. So I have 4 copies of her, and I think it's important to see her in the game to make the most use of her with the Georia. Plus, the fact that she's only 2 cost means that you can use your leader's ability and still play her for defense. I think that's good because gaining a life with your leader ability will cost you 4 Dawn. So playing a blocker for only 2 Dawn allows you more Dawn to work with during your turn when you're using your leader's ability. I also only have 2 Kikunojo. Ideally, I would like 4 copies, but sometimes the fact that she has no counter means if you don't find an opportunity to play her, then she can be a dead card in hand. So the deck currently has about 20 cards with no counter on them, so adding more will just increase the chances of having a bricky hand. So that's why I only included 2. She is good, she's really great, but she is also really easy to play around her. So anyways, so this is my list. I think Geomoria is a very strong addition this set, and I think the black yellow mom leader can use this card to set up some nasty plays before the big mom turn. So I'm just gonna go over what exactly you can do with Geomoria in this deck. So Geomoria lets you bring back a 4 cost or less and a 2 cost or less. So we need strong cards in these slots to make the best use of Geomoria's ability. If you decide to run the Sky Island package, then these 2 slots will probably be Shura and Ohm, right? So every time you play Geomoria and you bring these 2 back, you will get a search off of Shura, And potentially another body, so a fourth body with Own's ability if you're able to find a Holly with his search, or if you already have a Holly in your hand. And that is incredibly strong. So I think this is a good strategy, but the risk is always bottom decking your big moms. And if you're playing black and yellow big mom, you definitely want to play your 10 cost big moms. So instead, in my build, I decided to use the new OP06 cards. One of them, called Kiku no Jo. She has a trigger that lets you play her for free if your opponent is at 3 life or less, and if she is KO'd while your opponent has 3 cards or less in life, then you can gain a life. I also included Borsalino and Charlotte Galette. I think that's how you pronounce it. Um, these two are blockers, and this means that you can bring out a big body, so your Gecko Moria, while building up your defense with these two blockers. This is also a good move to do before your 10 cost Big Mom turn, because you will have blockers defending you. Also, another strong 2 cost card that I included is Kozuki Hiyori. She is a 2k counter, but has a really interesting on-play effect. She lets you draw a card from your life and replace it with a card from your hand. So essentially, she lets you kind of set up your life with important triggers that you want to get. I think these cards are really strong paired with Gecko Moria and provide a good setup for your 10 cost Big Mom turn. So if you think about the curve of this deck, especially going second, it's just really strong. So imagine on your second Dawn turn, or your first turn, going second, you play Hiyori, you take a card from your life and you replace it with something from your hand. Like you can replace it with a Perospero, a Sanji, whatever trigger you wanna activate on that turn. And then on your second turns, which is your fourth Dawn turn, you could put down like a Borsalino, you can put down Kiku no Jo, whatever, a strong 4 cost body. Your sixth turn, there really isn't something, at least in my list, there isn't an on curve play. I have experimented with the new Brook where that lets you kind of choose a 4 cost and put it in the trash. So this Brook can get around cards like Borsalino, or any card that's 4 cost or less that can't be KO'd by effects. This Brook doesn't KO; it just puts a card into the trash. So this was a card that I was experimenting with in the deck, and I did like it. But again, the problem is that black and yellow has so many good cards, it's hard to fit everything in. So in my final list, I didn't include it, but I think if you want to experiment with that card, go ahead, give it a try. Like this list that I'm providing, right, is just like, it's not a final list because it's still theory decking. Everybody online is just theory decking. So obviously the meta hasn't formed yet here in the US, but I think Brook can find a good place depending on the meta, because it does seem like a niche card. But if you do include that Brook, he's a good 6 cost character that you can play on curve, and you can remove something on the field, which is absolutely great. And on your 8th on turn, if your opponent killed your Kiku no Jo, or if your opponent KO'd your blocker Sanji, and and you pitched a 2 cost from your hand to counter out of an attack, well, at 8 Dawn, play Moria, and you can bring all of those back. And then guess what? 10 Dawn, boom, Big Mom. Like, that is such a strong curve. But even if you don't go second, like, thanks to your Big Mom Pirate archetype, you have a really strong, like, first turn curve as well, right? So you start off with the classic Pudding into Perospero. You have Gedatsu that you can play on turn 5 that lets you KO something, and kind of swing the the momentum in your favor, and then you have your 7 Dawn turn, which is your big mom. So usually when I play going first, I like to use Borsellino and Galette and Sanji as counters rather than playing them. That way, when I get to turn 9, I can use Gecko Morio's ability and play them both from the trash and set up a wall of blockers for my 10 Dawn Big Mom turn. So I think that's what makes Black Yellow Mom very dangerous, just the fact that it can use Gecko Moria as a setup for your Big Mom turn. And you can use it, defensively or offensively depending on the state of the game, right? You can use it to bring back 2 blockers. You can use it to bring back Kiku no Jo. You can and Hiyori, and then use her effect to kind of switch out, a life from a card from life and switch it with your hand from a card from your hand and put in a trigger that you want to get triggered. So again, Gecko Morio is pretty versatile into what you can bring back. The important thing though is to have strong 4 cost and 2 cost, right? You can even bring, if you don't even have a 4 cost in your grave or in your trash, you can even bring back Perospero. It says, so as long as it's a 4 cost or less, which is Perospero, and then a 2 cost or less, which is usually just the blocker, or Hiyori. You can even bring back Pudding, right? You can bring back Pudding and you can bring back Perospero. Both Gecko Moria brings back both. So that is really cool. And that is just the flexibility of Moria, and that's the danger that Black and Yellow Big Mom can do. And this is only the Black and Yellow Big Mom can do. Nobody else. No other leader. Another card that you want to be including is a new event card called Reject. This lets you KO a 5 cost or less character, or it lets you do 1 damage to your opponent's life if they have 1 life remaining. And this card costs 4 Dawn to activate. And it has a trigger. A trigger just lets you draw a card. This is a very versatile card and provides other options to KO key cards than just relying on Gedatsu. So usually lists have included 4 copies of Reject. In my list, again, it suffers. Black and Yellow deck suffers from just too many good cards. Like, you want to include Reject, you want to include Amaru, but then you want to include Kiku no Jo's. On all of these, you want to include 4 ofs. You want to include 4 Big Moms. You want to include 4 Morias, right? Like, you start including 4 of everything, and all of a sudden, you just run out of space. So I had to limit my rejects in this deck. I put it down to 2. But it's such a good card. You definitely want, between 2 to 4. Lots of pure yellow decks are running this at 3 or 4 cards, just because it's that good, and it lets you for yellow decks, like KOing something outside of like Gedatsu's ability or like Thunderbolt, which always felt bad if you had to play it from hand. But Reject kind of solves that, problem. But if you're playing black, you can KO stuff very easily. It's just that you will see some Black and Yellow Big Mom decks where they're doing a lot of the control stuff that Sakazuki does, which is like lowering life and KOing things, like doing that combo. This is a Black and Yellow Big Mom deck that doesn't do a lot of that, because you start doing all of that, then there's certain cards that you just cannot include, or you're gonna have a hard time fitting in all the other cards that can potentially work really good with Moria, in the black yellow kind of scenario. But again, this is just an outline. I think I'm just trying to provide ideas that you can use if you want to play Black and Yellow Mom. Like, these are some of the cards that I think you should look at. And so Reject is one of those new event cards in OP06 that I think you should look at. And Amaru is always good too.